of BJMP PDL population are awaiting or undergoing trial. So awaiting judgment. Ganyang kalaki po na kumbaga tulad po ng mga PDL sa mga custodial at detention facility pa lamang or kahit dito sa mga BJMP facilities natin, wala pang judgment, wala pang sentence.
90%.
Kumbaga, presumed innocent pa.
Yes, yes.
So, good development itong makaka-look forward tayo, ma-professionalize yung provincial and sub-provincial jails dahil mapapasa ilalim na ng management ng BJMP. And equally, yung ating mga detention and custodial facilities na nasa ilalim ng pulisya ay dapat ma-professionalize din yung pag-handle. Dahil, yun, as part nung pagkilala ng due process and karapatan ng ating mga PDLs dun sa mga facilities na iyon.
Rest assured, Your Honor, Mr. President, na ang treatment po ng BJMP doon sa mga PDLs, whether he belongs to the 90% awaiting trial or he belongs to the 10% convicted PDLs, ay pari-pareho lang po. So, makakaasa po kayo na aalagaan ng BJMP yung karapatang pantao ng ating mga PDLs, whether awaiting trial or convicted.
Maraming salamat. Good sponsor, Mr. President. Alam natin, despite the best of intentions, maya't maya sa iba't ibang institusyon natin ng gobyerno, may mga horror stories. Kaya ganito lang ka-importante itong mga reform process natin, no? Whether po sa ganitong panukalang batas o yung mga organizational development na dinadaanan ng iba't ibang departamento natin. And I want to keep the faith about this, about the BJMP, for example, dahil alam ko na may maasahan tayo sa leadership ng BJMP. Kahit magiging matagal po yung proseso, I think all of us pagtutulong-tulungan natin ito. So
Thank you for keeping the faith. Thank you for keeping the faith, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Opo. May mga araw na mas madali, may mga araw na mas hindi madali, good sponsor. Maraming salamat, Mr. President. Good sponsor. I'm hopeful that this bill will improve our correctional system. Sana ay patuloy ang mga hakbang para gawin itong di lang mas epektibo, pero mas makatao rin. At sana ay patuloy ang BJMP sa mga programang nagbibigay oportunidad sa PDLs na itama ang kanilang landas. So, salamat, good sponsor. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Mr. President, earlier, during the interpellation of Senator Risa Hontiveros, she mentioned a summit, that a summit was held about jail
decongestion
Yes,
summit.
If the sponsor can tell us what have been the highlights or the conclusions of the said summit and who participated in the said summit, Mr. President? As well as when was this held?
The summit, Mr. President, was all about the meeting of the judges and the BJMP and Bucor officers in order to facilitate the release of those PDLs who are due for release, Mr. President, in order to decongest the jails.
And may we know, Mr. President, if just in case the sponsor has information, what are the main decision points or conclusions, Mr. President? Action points?
One of the issues resolved during that summit, Mr. President, Your Honor, was the creation of the Justice Sector Zone that will handle all the cases that are due for release, Mr. President, so that early release can be done with these PDLs, Mr. President. So far, that's the only issue that is passed to me by our people here from the BJMP, Mr. President.
Is the BGMP assisted by computerized systems, Mr. President, in monitoring the length of detention of each inmate, Mr. President, or PDL?
Yes, Mr. President. Right now, that was one of the decision points that was produced during that summit, yung computerization of records for the PDLs, Mr. President.
Is that future tense or present tense? Are they now being assisted by computerized database, Mr. President? With prompts, with reminders, mga ganun?
They're starting to develop right now, Mr. President. They call it the single computer system. Single carpeta system.
Carpeta?
For all the BJMP units all over the Philippines. They try to make a single carpeta system. And right now, it is already being used. It's being rolled out, Mr. President.
Dati, Mr. President, kada inmate siguro or may isang folder. Ngayon, dapat kada inmate isang file or
That's the main objective, Mr. President.
digital file, Mr. President. So, maganda na po ba ang system ngayon ng BJMP na no one can be accidentally or intentionally detained for a longer period than necessary or authorized?
Yes, Mr. President. They are nodding their heads that that will not happen right now.
It's not happening right now.
It's not happening and it will not happen.
Okay, so anyway, wala naman akong sinasabing may nagreklamo din sa opisina ko. So, yes, Mr. President. So, ngayon po, how many inmates are under the jurisdiction of the BJMP?
Ilan? Right now, we have 118,000, Mr. President. 118,632. The present number of
118,632.
632
PDLs.
PDLs.
Yes. We know the gender or the sex, Mr. President?
Gender. Male, female. Right now, we have 106,930 male PDLs and 11,702 female PDLs, Mr. President.
Okay, ngayon ito pong, so yan yung currently, no? And,
Yes, Mr.
and these PDLs are held in how many BJMP operated or managed jails, Mr. President? Spread over how many jails ito sila?
They are being housed in 445 BJMP jail facilities all over the archipelago, Mr. President.
445, sir?
445.
Yes, okay. So yan yun as of today, no? And then because of our bill, we will be ang maximum nito, ang subject matter ng bill po natin, we can add ilan pa ba? We can add how many more jail facilities po ito? Pinag-usapan natin.
Say again, Mr. President.
Currently, BGMP is operating 445 jail facilities.
Yes, Mr.
And then, yung bill po natin, ilang possible jail facilities pa itong pinag-usapan natin? Plus,
It
ilan ba-
61
lang, ano?
provincial jail facilities, Mr. President.
alam po natin ang
Population.
yes, inmate population itong 61.
This right now, this 61 provincial jail facilities is catering to 21,775, Mr. President.
Okay.
21,000.
Generally speaking, Mr. President, yung mga nakadetain sa BJMP facilities are those undergoing or awaiting trial, detention prisoners, and then plus those sentenced 3 years and below.
Yes, Mr. President.
Finally convicted na yun, final
Yes, Mr.
judgment.
President.
Ito pong nasa 61 provincial and sub-provincial jails, which are the topics of which are the subject matter of our bill. Sino po mga nakadetain naman po dito?
They are also, all of them are convicted with the sentence of 3 years and below, Mr.
All,
President.
all.
All of them.
All.
Nobody is awaiting trial. Nobody is awaiting trial. All of them are convicted already with sentence ranging from sentence with 3 years and below.
Okay. Doon po sa ating current na 445 PGMP jail facilities, ilan po doon yung convicted with 3 years and below?
445 na rin. For the 445 BGMP facilities, currently, Mr. President, we are catering to 3,030 insular prisoners. Insular convicts. Yeah, insular prisoners or convicts, which is around 2.55%.
But, these are the 3 years and below. Okay.
Yes,
Diba?
Mr. President.
So yung recently turned over, sir, Mr. President, the 11 provincial jails and 4 sub-provincial jails turned over by the provinces to BJMP through MOA, ang inmates dito are those serving 3 years, final sentence of 3 years and below.
Below. Yes, Mr. President.
So what would be the plan, sir, with if the bill becomes law, we have 61 other jail facilities to be turned over. Will we be segregating those who are detention prisoners from the convicts? Ganun po ba yun?
Yes, Mr. President.
What would be the plan? The former provincial jails and sub-provincial jails will house the convicts, the insular, so-called insular prisoners?
Yes, Mr. President.
So how will it help now decongest the BJMP facilities which are holding detention prisoners?
So, this 3,000 BGMP PDLs at present can be distributed in this to this 61 to these 61 provincial jails that will be eventually transferred to their custody.
Pero ano lang po yun kasi 3,030 yung prisoners natin out of 445 jail facilities. So halos 10 lang yun. Less than 10 pa nga, less than 10 heads lang po yung gagalaw per facility, Mr. President. Mararamdaman po kaya ng ating mga detention prisoners yung ginhawa ng 10 ulong na paalis. But at any rate, Mr. President, yung provincial jails and sub-provincial jails na mati-turn over sa BJMP, meron naman siguro tayong idea on the area ng mga yan, ano? Yung area ng kanilang detention facilities. Ngayon, tapos i-divide natin sa population, ano kaya yung density? Kasi gaano ka-dense ang magiging BJMP facilities with detention prisoners versus gaano ka-dense ang former provincial and sub-provincial jails with prisoners, with insular prisoners.
That is possible, Mr. President. They can study on the density and come up with the policies wherein talagang luluwag yung mga prisuhan natin. Kung makita natin, like for example, may nakita akong malawak na provincial jail doon sa Bigan, Ilocos, Sur, maganda yung buildings nila, baka pwedeng isama yun sa planning na dagdagan yun ng mas marami. O kaya, instead na mga convicted ang nandun, yung mga awaiting trial na malaking number, pwedeng ilagay doon. So, depende na yan sa magiging approach na gagawin ng ating mga BJMP leadership, Mr. President.
Okay, so the current practice or the current plan will not determine the future plans. So, meron po tayo, hindi bawal. The flexibility is there now for the BJMP to decide what use will be this former provincial jail be put to and the former sub-provincial jail. Ganun ba?
Correct, Mr. President, Your Honor. Nothing can prevent the BJMP leadership to devise plans in order to maximize the utility of these facilities, Mr. President. Lalong-lalo na kung maganda at malawak yung facility na yan, pwede lang gawa ng mas magandang plano.
Meron na po tayong projection na if this bill becomes law, what would now be our detention prisoner to facility or square meter ratio, Mr. President?
You mean the ratio?
Kunyari, let's say naging ano na to, I mean 61 provincial sa provincial jails are now under the BJMP. So nag-increase na ngayon yung total area nila of detention area, pero nag-increase din po yung mga people detained, persons deprived of liberty. What will our density be on a per square meter basis, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, right now, BJMP is poised to gain additional 57,592 square meters floor area from that 61 provincial jails. So, anong maging
Is this of detention space?
Yes, when we say floor area, Mr. President, that's the detention facility itself, the building, because this is a floor area.
Floor area, but baka malaking opisina po diyan sa ano. I mean yung pang detention po talaga. Do we have it?
This is detention.
This is the
Purely detention area.
Sige po, that's
57.
That's a good input, Mr. President. How about yung 445 jail facilities natin? How large is the detention space?
Floor area natin sa current BJMP. Floor area ng current.
I-divide yun na lang. Divide prisoners divided by square meters. You get heads per square meter.
So, right now, Mr. President, the floor area of the cell area of the BJMP is 143,237 square meters, Mr. President. 143,237 floor area.
Apa.
Cell area. Okay, cell area. To be
Yes,
more to be more precise.
Yes.
Cell area.
Cell area where the persons deprived of liberties are held.
Yes, Mr. President.
Sige po, nakikita natin na may space pala. Mas maganda ang in terms of space or density or crowding, mas komportable pala doon sa
Provincial jails.
61, yes.
Yes.
Sa 61 provincial and sa provincial
Malayong
jails.
malayo, Mr. President. Because the overcrowded are city jails. Most of them are city jails. Provincial jails, less crowded talaga kung puntahan natin actual visit.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. Ngayon, Mr. President, ito po ba ang mga provincial and sub-provincial jails? Siyempre, ito ay building, lupa, mga walls, di ba? And some other facilities. Are these assets of the provinces?
Yes, Mr. President.
How about the sub-provincial jails? Kanino siyang asset?
Province also,
Province,
Mr.
di ba?
President.
Our bill now transfers ownership of the assets. Yung binanggit ko, transfers the ownership to the BJMP?
Yes, Mr. President.
Will the provinces be compensated, Mr. President? The Jail Bureau will see to it that a budget will be allocated to compensate the LGUs for such properties that cannot or may not be subjected to donation, subject to provision of RA 9184 and the Commission on Audit rules. So, kung hindi talaga i-donate ng LGU yung kanilang piece of land, yung property nila na tinitirikan ng provincial jail, ay mag-allocate talaga ang BJMP ng pera para mabayaran. Pero most of them are going to donate, Mr. President. Ito pong nabanggit niyo po sa earlier interpellation na 11 provincial jails and 4 sub-provincial jails turned over kasi term natin ginamit yata through MOA. Are these donations?
Donation. Use of PRAC ulit, Mr. President. MOA, through use of PRAC through MOA.
So BJMP to use, merong term yung use of PRAC, Mr. President?
It varies, Mr. President. There is a use of PRAC good for 25 years, merong 30 years, merong 20 years. So nagbabari, depende sa LGU na kausap ng BJMP.
Ano pong makocontribute itong ating panukalang batas para ma-standardize, maklaro anong relationship, ma-donation ba ito, babayaran ba? Kasi this will now be turned over due to law. So what is this? A forced donation or some sort of an expropriation? Assume kasi natin, accept natin na may independent juridical personality si province, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, ang nakalagay dito sa ating proposed measure is that for this purpose, the management, control, and supervision of existing provincial and sub-provincial jails, including all its property, equipment, and finances, shall be transferred to the BJMP subject to existing laws.
Oo
So, kung i-donate, marami naman sa kanila ang nag-commit na i-donate nila once ma-transfer na itong provincial jail to the BJMP, pati yung lote, i-donate nila, Mr. President. Pero yun nga, kung hindi willing mag-donate yung iba, hahanapan ng BJMP ng pondo yan para makompensate yung LGU.
Shall be, sa page 2, line 3, shall be transferred to the BJMP po yung words na ginamit, shall. So, how will we interpret this, Mr. President? No choice na yung if the bill becomes law, control and supervision over the provincial and sub-provincial jail by force of law transferred na to BJMP. First paragraph po yun ng section 3. Pagdating sa second paragraph, so how will this operate, Mr. President? Yung property, equipment, and finances shall be transferred to the BJMP.
Subject to existing laws.
And what would be these existing laws, Mr. President? Hindi yung shall kasi, sabihin wala silang gawin.
Right now, Mr. President, the prevailing situation is that anong law yun? There is a law that says that the LGU cannot donate a lot to the BJMP. Pero pag magawa natin itong batas na ito, then
Pwede nating mas klaruhin pa, siguro, Mr.
okay na.
President.
Yeah, Mr. President.
Mr. President, yung-
Ano natin? Anong batas yun?
Tapos siguro, Mr. President, dahil batas na nga ito, kasi nagagawa na pala from the interpellation, nakita natin na nagagawa na Yung main objective na i-transfer ang control and supervision over a provincial and sub-provincial jail ay nagagawa na through a MOU. MOA or MOU? What was the... MOA, through a MOA. Yes, nagagawa na pala. So, kailangan kung gagawin natin by law, there must be a reason bakit kailangan natin gawin yung law at saka makatulong yung law kung meron bang mga hindi standard practice, isa standardize ng law yung practice. Kung merong hindi klaro, isa standardize din ng law yung hindi klaro. Ika-clarify, sasagutin yung ambiguity, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I agree.
Yes, Mr.
So
President.
maybe in the proper time, if you can
Yes,
introduce
Mr.
some
President,
amendments, I am willing to...
At least naklaro po natin ngayong gabi na yung because the word shall found on
Mr. President, if I may.
Yes, sir.
There is, right now, there is a DOJ opinion that the MOA is not binding as far as the act of transferring or donating the provincial jail, including its lote, to the BJMP. So, by virtue of this law, ma-institutionalize natin na talagang covered yan na dapat i-transfer sa BJMP.
Yes, yan purpose. This will become one of the purposes of the law. Why we need it?
Yes, Mr. President.
Kasi hindi lang it's yung operation, yung control, management kaya na through MOA.
Properties.
But yung paglipat talaga na this time the asset is now the asset of the BJMP. We need the law.
So, in the absence of this law daw,
Yes.
in the absence of this law, the MOA cannot stand for the transfer.
Yes.
So, kailangan natin i-approve itong batas na ito.
Ngayon,
So, with your amendment, sooner, Mr. President.
Kung naklaro po yan from the very start, sugot pa ang mga provinces, payag pa sila dito sa ating bill. Kasi hindi rin klaro rito na i-compensate sila.
Per consultations, Mr. President, most of them are willing. Most of them are willing. Dahil nga, itong mga nakakulong dyan ay mga province mates lang din nila, coming from their province. So, siguro, gusto rin nila na mabigyan ng magandang kulungan yung kanila mga province mates na nakakulong, Mr. President. So, okay sila.
Sa provincial budget po, sa mga nakausap niyo po mga provinces, magkano ba doon yung na-appropriate nila for the operations and maintenance of the provincial jail? More or less, anong range?
Well, ang nakuha lang natin, Mr. President, no, aside from the PS,
May PS pa pala, no? PS.
aside from the PS, dahil
Yeah.
may manning sila doon, di ba? Yung mga jail guards nila. Yung kanilang MOA, actually mas mababa kaysa BJMP as far as subsistence allowance is concerned. Dahil sa BJMP is 70 pesos per day. Yung ibang LGU ay mayroong ang subsistence nila is only 55 pesos or 40. May 40, may 55. So sa BJMP, 70. Sa kanila mas mababa. So mas mababa yung kailang MOA lumalabas.
May mga kuryente pa po, tubig. Paano po yun? MOE din po yun. Sagot ng probinsya yun.
Sagot ng probinsya.
Kaya more or less, kaya sa happy sila because of this law, this bill, marirelieve sila doon. Mga magkano po yung range doon from the smallest provincial jail to the biggest provincial jail? Magkano po yung masisave nila?
We don't have the estimate right now.
Okay, but definitely, nung pumayag sila sa bill na ito, doon sila nakatingin kasi sa recurring gastos nila.
Yes, Mr. President.
But hindi po nila naisip pa yun na yung asset nila. Sa mata nila, asset pa rin nila. Yun, Mr. President. But meron tayong second paragraph nga ng Section 3 na shall be transferred to the BJMP, kama subject to existing laws. Yun.
Yes.
Which, was this made clear to them? Na it's not only that they will save their recurring annual expenses for maintenance and operations, pero paano pala yung assets nila? Sa books nila, assets nila yan.
Yeah, it was made clear to them, Mr. President, during the hearing. And in fact, they volunteered to donate their the lot being occupied by the provincial jail.
Good news.
So,
Okay, so,
So,
was that a standard position of all the 61 more or less na...
almost all, Mr. President, because most of them were represented. And yung nga lang, they are waiting for this law para magiging legal yung pag-transfer nila.
Okay. So they're not expecting to be compensated nga for the asset that they are going to donate anyway.
So far, they are not.
Okay,
They are
sige.
not, Mr. President.
Pero at any rate, Mr. President, with the manifestation of our sponsor, dapat pala hindi natin ilimit yung usapan natin na as if 61 na lang itong subject matter nitong bill. Kasi pati yung earlier turned over through MOA, subject pa rin pala sila
Yes,
sa
correct.
bill na to. So,
Correct, Mr. President.
yes, so plus 11 plus 4 pa. So yes, sila yung subject matter ng bill po natin.
Yes, Mr. President.
So ano pong magiging budgetary implication po nito sa BJMP, which is ang budget ng BJMP would be an integral part of the DILG's budget po, no? Tama po ba
Yes,
yan?
Mr. President.
Ano pong budgetary implication po nito?
Mr. President, we have a total budget annual budget for the first 3 years. Kasi hindi pa natin sinama dito yung subsistence allowance at medical allowance ng mga PDLs. PS lang muna ito at saka capital outlay, Mr. President. It will amount to 1,266,325,000. So 1.2 billion, Mr. President, annually. After 3 years, once the turnover na, Mr. President, automatic ang BJMP na ang magpapakain nito mga priso at magpapagamot. So idagdag natin yung subsistence and medical allowance. Madagdagan po yan, Mr. President, ng 677 million, Mr. President. So after 3 years, magiging 1.9 billion annual budget, Mr. President.
Pwede po bang isipin na kung ano yung budget na sinalo ni National, yun naman ang savings ng mga provinces? Tama po ba yun na analogy?
Tama,
kunyari,
Mr. President.
yung 1.2 billion a year for the first 3 years na i-shoulder na ng national government through the DILG BJMP budget, 1.2 billion a year, yan ang na-relieve naman natin ang mga
More or less, Mr.
provincial
President.
and provinces na 1.2 billion?
More or less, Mr. President. That is to be divided by
Yes, by the,
61.
Yes, by the
61.
concerned. Or hindi po ba meron na sa halagang yan is because tataas din ang PS ng mga personnel na ililipat?
Yes, Mr. President.
Diba? Kasi,
because
isang benefit po ba yun? Have we compared BJMP personnel versus provincial jail personnel? Ano po yung pagdating po sa sweldo, mataas ang BJMP? Tama po ba?
mataas talaga ang BJMP, Mr.
Pagdating
President.
sa qualifications, let us say credentials, experience, educational attainment, mataas.
Yes, Mr.
Mataas po. Sige. Tapos, meron po tayo sa page, sa section 5 na, Mr. President, section 5. Section 5, where we talk about yung sa provided finally, page 2, line 24, that the provincial government is hereby encouraged to automatically absorb those employees who have already reached the mandatory age in BGMP at the time of effectivity. Iba po ba ang mandatory retirement ages ng nagtatrabaho sa BJMP at saka nagtatrabaho sa provincial jail?
Iba, Mr. President.
What would be the difference, Mr. President?
For BJMP, it's 56 years old, and for the provincial employees, it's 65. 65, Mr. President.
Sige. So yung provincial employees, the general, ano sila? The retirement age under civil service
65.
rules, and then BJMP would be like the police force na
MUP.
military. MUP. Yes,
MUP.
Mr. President. Well, siguro if we can just request the author or the sponsor to revisit the use of the phrase encouraged to automatically absorb. Yun lang po kasi. Yeah, yes, because we are encouraging pero at the same time automatic yung kilos. Just styling, Mr. President.
We are just trying to be diplomatic with the use of words here, Mr. President, because we cannot mandate the local government to really absorb.
Yes.
So we are. But before we come up with these words, we already got their willingness, their commitment to absorb all their people because these are all their employees, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. So ang nakalagay dito sa ating panukalang batas, control supervision of provincial sub-provincial jails lipat sa BJMP. All assets, property, finances, ilipat din sa
Including.
BJMP. Personnel, ilipat din as a
Yes,
matter of policy.
Yes, Mr. President.
And then since we established earlier that mataas po ang qualifications or requirements for BJMP personnel, of course, we anticipate the situation where there will be provincial jail personnel who are supposed to be absorbed by the BJMP who cannot yet qualify.
Yes.
And we gave them more or less 8 years, tama ba? Transition period to qualify.
Yes, Mr. President.
Tama po. Okay, kasi dalawang provisions po yan. And then because the agency to which they will be transferring has a lower retirement age, coming from provincial to. So how did we anticipate that, Mr. President? Yung ganon, that the provincial jail employee to transfer to the BGMP will be subjected to the new retirement age of 56.
Yes, Mr. President.
So have we anticipated the situation na 55 na si provincial jail employee or 57 na si provincial jail employee? Dalawang scenarios po yun. Isa is 55, about paglipat, iikli na yung kanyang remaining government service time. Yung isa, lampas na siya sa retirement age ngayon ng agency na lilipatan niya. Have we anticipated that?
Yes, we have anticipated that, Mr. President. That is why we already get the commitment of the provincial governors as far as this 56 years old and above are concerned. Dahil hindi na talaga sila by law, we cannot absorb them. So yung less than 56, pwede pa ma-absorb.
Okay.
And
Yung
they can
more-
retire. Kahit na 1 month or 6 months, pwede pa rin sila, Mr. President. So they can retire right away after reaching the age of 56. Basta, kuwan lang sila. Basta qualified sila.
Yes. Yes. So in the meantime, yung 8-year transition period na binibigay natin na they will now try to qualify, they will remain provincial employees?
Provincial employees. Well, technically, they are under the provincial government, Mr. President, yung transition period na yan na 3 years, after the transition period of 3 years, the BGMP law will apply to them. So yung 5 years na yan, ibibigay natin sa kanila basta qualified sila other than the requirements like educational attainment and the civil service eligibility. So halimbawa, bata pa sila, Mr. President, physically unable sila, pwede natin i-absorb at bibigyan ng 5 years to comply with the requirements bago sila talaga finally
Three-year transition period, all employees of the provincial jails remain as employees of the province.
Yes, Mr. President.
After the transition period, they now become BJMP employees and they have 5 years to
Comply.
satisfy and comply with the requirements.
Yes, Mr. President.
But they will now be BJMP employees.
BJMP employees na sila.
Failing to qualify after 5 years, there will be a termination.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. But yung 5 years po yun, sagot na sila ng BJMP. Ngayon yung mga over the BJMP retirement age na will now have to remain or stay as provincial employees.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yung from the start po. When our bill becomes law, meron na dyan beyond 56 years old na nasa provincial jail employee siya, no more transfer to the BJMP.
No more, Mr. President.
Klaro po yun.
Klaro.
Iwan sila sa provinces.
Iwan sila.
Nabilang na po natin yan, more or less. Hindi pala, kasi hindi pa natin alam kailan ito magiging law.
We have the number.
More or less
Yeah, we have the
per,
number.
siguro per January 1 of a year, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President.
Apo. So, Mr. President, what happened to the case of Dr. Benigno Iggy Agbayani Jr., Mr. President? Was he under the jurisdiction and care of the BJMP? Ito po yung doktor na namatay sa Manila City Jail. Is that a BJMP facility?
Yes, Mr. President. BJMP.
Ano pa nangyari rito, Mr. President?
1 month before his release, Mr. President, he suffered cardiac arrest.
Ito pong Manila City Jail ay na-feature na ata to sa isang documentary sa Netflix na
Netflix.
Yes, inside the world's toughest prisons.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yung syempre of course that the person making the documentary, malawak naman experience niya. I think he has visited a lot of prisons. And one thing he found strange in the Philippines is that strange, unusual or surprising to him is the fact that the jail is being run by the inmates. So is that our conscious decision, Mr. President?
Right now, Mr. President, hindi na po yan nangyayari. As far as BGMP is concerned.
Bakit nung na-shoot ba yung documentary na yon, hindi siya under BJMP?
BGMP na, Mr. President.
Kaya nga, precisely. Ano pong nagbago, Mr. President?
Right now, the gangs are dissolved. No more gangs inside the BJMP. Para walang maghari-harian, Mr. President. Ang hari lang doon talaga ay yung mga jail guards. Yung
Senator Tolentino ay gumawa po siya ng parang declaration or understanding. At ang nakalagay po doon sa declaration, pang-apat na talata in English, number 4, such signing, I'm now referring to the signing of the accession to the UNCLOS, such signing shall not in any manner impair or prejudice the sovereignty of the Republic of the Philippines over any territory over which it exercises sovereign authority, such as, binanggit po dito, yung Kalayaan Islands and the waters pertinent thereto. Meaning to say that even when we signed UNCLOS, we never gave up, we never abandoned our claims, Mr. President. So, tama po ang ating kinagalang na kapatid na sa ginagawa niyang pagbibigkas ng kanyang salubin. Subalit gusto ko pong idagdag at bigyan ng diin na wala pong pagbabago. It has been there. It will remain there. It is part of our history. It is part of our culture. It is part of our legal regime. It is part of the international agreement we entered into called UNCLOS, and it has been recognized. UNCLOS, our membership in UNCLOS has been recognized by the entire diplomatic community. So it's there, Mr. President. Wala po tayo, maging sa batas na ating binabalangkas ngayon, ay wala po tayong inaabandona. Subalit, meron lamang mga kataga na hindi natin na ilalagay, sang-ayon na rin sa mga kasunduang ating pinasukan, na lalong-lalo na yung United Nations Charter, kung saan lahat po ng resolutions ng conflict should be settled under the provisions provided for by the United Nations Charter, which would refer to peaceful settlement and negotiations without derogating Philippine sovereignty. Yun lamang po ang may dadagdag ko sa bilang tugon sa pananaw na ginagalang natin, kapatid, na buhat sa Nueva Ecija at sa rehiyon ng Bicol, Mr. President. Salamat po, mahal na kapatid, Senator Padilla.
Maraming salamat po.
Mahaba yung explanation ng ating professor.
Opo,
Please proceed.
napakaganda po ng kanyang pasasabi ko pong another lecture from the teacher, Senator Tolentino. Napakaganda po. Alam niyo po, ito po ay tatanungin na utang na loob sa inyo ng marami nating mga kapatid. Sapagkat matagal na po namin inaantay na magkaroon uli ng batas na magbibigay ng lakas ng loob sa ating mga kapatid na nandyan pa rin ang gobyerno ng Pilipinas at kakampi nila. Ito po yung aking amendment. Handa na po bang pakinggan ng ating teacher?
Buong pagbubukas po ng kaisipan, damdamin at puso ang aking magiging paghahanda.
Isang Babaysiano at isang Batanggenyo ang natatagalugan dito, mahal na Pangulo. Ito na po. On page 6, dito po sa inyo pong anukala, page 6.
And I think, Mr. President, we have the same clean copy dated February 20, 2024,
Yes.
coming from the Secretariat. Page 6.
Opo.
Yes, Your Honor.
Lines 23 to 25, section 19,
Section 19.
amend the last paragraph to read as follows: all other laws, presidential decrees, executive orders, rules and regulations, proclamations, and other issuances, inconsistent with or contrary to the provisions of this act are deemed amended or repealed accordingly, provided that nothing in this act shall be construed as repealing Section 2 of Republic Act Number 5446 as amended by Republic Act Number 9522 or an act to define the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippines.
Can we, Mr. President, can we hear again the last line? The title of Republic Act 9522 was mentioned. What about Republic Act 5446?
Basahin ko po ulit.
Opo.
Apo. Ito po yung idinagdag namin, mahal na Senator Tolentino. Pagkatapos po ng colon, provided that nothing in this act shall be construed as repealing Section 2 of Republic Act Number 5446, as amended by Republic Act Number 9522 or an act to define the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippines.
Period.
Period.
Co-sponsored the measure, Mr.
I
President.
distinguished Majority Floor Leader Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is my honor and privilege to co-sponsor Senate Bill number 2560 under Committee Report number 204 or the Anti-Financial Accounts Scamming Act. Having filed our own version of the measure, we would like to thank our distinguished colleague, sponsor of the measure, Senator Mark Villar, for his hard work on this measure, which is one of the priority legislations of this administration. Mr. President, because of the pandemic, a huge spotlight was placed on digitalization in the conduct of everyday business. With mobility and face-to-face interactions and activities restricted, many Filipinos turned to online and digital banking methods to conduct their personal and business transactions. Dahil po dito, Ginoong Pangulo, dumoble nga po ang dami ng mga Pilipino na nagkaroon ng access sa mga bangko at iba pang electronic money channels. According to the BSP, the number of bank population was about 56% of all adults in 2021, up from just 29% in 2019. This is equivalent, Mr. President, to about 22 million Filipinos who have acquired access to formal financial accounts in just 2 years. In 2022, Mr. President, the share of Filipinos with bank accounts has further grown to 65% of the adult population. However, Mr. President, with the continued evolution of banking and electronic payment methods, fraudulent activities involving bank accounts, e-wallets, and other financial accounts have also increased. In fact, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas said that complaints related to the use of internet and mobile banking constitute 45.2% of the total complaints they received in 2021. A staggering 42,456 complaints on financial fraud, account takeover or identity theft, phishing, and other schemes were reported between 2020 and 2021. Ginoong Pangulo, nagiging sophisticado na rin po ang modus ng mga scammer para makapanloko sa kapwa-tao. Noong pong nakaraang taon, ibinahagi po ng isang Facebook user kung paano tinangkang kuhanan ng 20,000 ang tatay niya dahil umano sa maling numerong sinendan ng GCash. Ang text na natanggap ng tatay niya ay mukha talagang legit na galing po sa GCash sa unang tingin. Tapos, wala pang isang minuto, may nag-text na sa kanya para bawiin ang 20,000 dahil nga nagkamali daw ng padala ng pera. Buti na lang, hindi nagtagumpay ang mga scammer na ito dahil nasuri agad ang peking text mula sa GCash. In addition, Mr. President, one of my own staff was scammed into buying concert tickets. She was made to believe the tickets were legitimate. Hence, she transferred money to the digital bank account of the seller, only to be blocked later by the scammer. We sought the help of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and the Destination Bank, but unfortunately, Mr. President, the funds were already moved as soon as they were received. Madami na rin po tayong natatanggap na reklamo, Ginoong Pangulo, mula sa mga nabibiktima ng mga nagpapanggap na representative ng mga bangko na tumatawag para umano sa security updates at hihingin ang mga pribadong impormasyon ng account balance, ng account holders, gaya ng birth date, address, pangalan ng kanilang nanay at iba pa, na nagre-resulta po sa pag-take over at pag-access ng mga scammers accounts ng mga biktima. Hence, Mr. President, we firmly believe that it is time to pass this very important piece of legislation to protect consumers from falling prey to cyber criminals and criminal syndicates who target financial accounts or lure account holders into perpetrating fraudulent activities, including becoming money mules themselves. We also welcome, Mr. President, the provision under the bill that large-scale commission of these crimes shall be declared a form of economic sabotage and a heinous crime, and thus will be punishable to the maximum level allowed by our laws. Mr. President, we hope that with this measure, we will finally put a stop to the criminal activities targeting our innocent kababayans and their hard-earned money. Again, we'd like to thank the sponsor of the measure, Senator Mark Villar, and of course, our Senate President for pushing for this very important piece of legislation. We pledge our full support to the passage of this important measure. Thank you, and may God bless us all.
Thank you very much, Majority Leader. Actually, this is also a LEDAC measure.
Yes, Mr. President.
This is a priority. And to hasten the proceedings, I would just like to put on record that I'll just submit for the record my
Thank you,
response.
Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, next to co-sponsor is the distinguished lady from Pangasinan and Iloilo, no other than our amazing grace of the Senate, Senator Grace Po. I move that she be recognized.
Our distinguished colleague, Senator Grace Po, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And also from San Juan. Mr. President,
Don't forget San Juan.
Yeah.
San Juan.
Hey, Mayor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, it is my privilege to co-sponsor this measure born of necessity. The pandemic pushed us to rely on online financial transactions heavily. With a spike in digital transactions came a spike in fraud as well. Sinimulan na natin ang pagpapaigting ng seguridad ng mga digital transactions sa SIM Registration Act. Pero hindi ito sapat. Kaya Ngayon naman, hihigpitan natin ang seguridad ng ating mga financial accounts tulad ng GCash, Maya Online Banks, pati mga e-wallets na mga pinakagamit na apps tulad ng Shopee, Lazada at Grab. They say that there are only two certain things in life, death and taxes. Ngayon, mukhang kinakailangan na nito ng amendment, death, taxes, and scams. These fraudulent schemes and rackets have become the bane of our financial consumers. Nitong mga nakaraang linggo lang, we heard the news of at least 120 e-wallet account holders losing their hard-earned money in an instant, apparently because of a phishing scam as reported by the Bangko Sentral. We also heard of a news report years ago when some teachers were scammed into giving away their financial details, eventually losing as much as 26,000 to 121,000 from their bank accounts. These stories and other countless reports of scams, shams, and other deceits only cement our status as a scamming hotbed in Asia. In 2022, we ranked 5th among Southeast Asian countries in terms of phishing attacks and incidents. In the same year, we lost a staggering 623 million pesos to fraud, 623 million to phishing, and 409 million to identity theft. At mas malala pa ito sa cybersecurity experts believe that these incidents would only get worse in 2024 and beyond. As principal author of this measure and as the co-sponsor and co-author of the Financial Products and Services Consumer Protection Act last Congress, this bill is part of an ongoing campaign against these scams, shams, and frauds. I first filed this bill in 2021 when e-money accounts rose to an astonishing 16.8 million as the pandemic prompted many to make the necessary transactions online. But these schemes chip away the trust in our financial system, threatening to undo years of progress in financial inclusion and digital innovation. And while financial education and literacy is still key in preventing these schemes, kinakailangan natin ng mas konkretong aksyon para habulin at parusahan itong mga manloloko at masasamang loob. I would like to thank the sponsor of this bill, Senator Mark Villar, for pushing forward for this measure. Mr. President, fellow senators, it is thus with urgency that I co-sponsor Senate Bill number 2560 under Committee Report number 204, and I earnestly ask my colleagues for the swift passage of this much-needed measure. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Mr.
Maraming
President.
salamat.
Mr. President, next to co-sponsor the measure is the distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela City, no other than Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. I move that he be recognized.
Our distinguished colleague from the city of Valenzuela, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I rise today to co-sponsor the Anti-Financial Accounting Scamming Act, which seeks to protect the integrity of our country's financial system and the security of our financial accounts from cybercriminals and scammers. One of the very visible impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic is the advancement in the use of digital financial services. Damang-daman natin ito, lalong-lalo na ang mga kababayan nating mayroon online banking, e-wallets, and digital payments. Sino ba naman ang aayaw sa kaginhawaan na idudulot nito? Ngunit sa kabilang banda, kung gaano kabilis ang pag-usbong ng digital financial services, gaano din kabilis ang galawan ng mga kawatan sa paggamit nito bilang instrumento sa pangloloko at paggawa ng krimen. This digital financial services exposes us to the risk of financial-related cybercrimes such as hacking, phishing, identity theft, and money laundering, among others. Over the years, we have witnessed many cases of innocent Filipinos losing their hard-earned money to various financial-related cybercrimes. Some of these were the Mark Nagoyo scam in 2021, where over 700 BDO Unibank customer accounts were hacked. The unauthorized bank transfers in Land Bank that victimized teachers in 2022, and the massive phishing incident involving GCash users in 2023. Mr. President, I can attest that these incidents have caused not only financial losses, but also emotional distress, anxiety, and loss of trust for financial institutions among the victims of these financial-related cybercrimes and the general public. Kung matatandaan ninyo, noong 2021, ako mismo ay nabiktima ng credit card hacking. Wala akong kamalay-malay na may kawatan na umorder sa isang food delivery platform na nagkakahalaga ng 1 milyon piso gamit ang credit card ko. Ang mga kriminal na ito ay walang tinatatakutan, walang puso, at higit sa lahat, walang konsiderasyon sa perang hindi naman nila pinaghihirapan. But above all, these cybercrimes tarnish the integrity of our financial system, which greatly affects our economy and security. Sa katunayan, ayon sa ulat ng Kaspersky Security Network, ang Pilipinas ay pang-apat sa global ranking ng mga bansa tina-target ng online threats sa taong 2023. This reality is further underscored by the fact that in 2020-2021, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas received more than 42,000 complaints from consumers who fell victim to financial fraud. Tunay na nakababahala na sa kasagsagan ng pandemya kung kailan napakarami sa ating mga kababayan ang nawalan ng hanapbuhay ay libo-libong Pilipino rin ang nabiktima ng iba't ibang scams. Ginong Pangulo, sa patuloy na pakikipaglaro ng mga kriminal, napapanahon na upang mabitag natin sila gamit ang pangil ng batas. This is why we need the Anti-Financial Accounts Coming Act. This bill establishes clear and severe penalties for those who willingly act as money mules, those who use social engineering schemes and other fraudulent means to solicit financial account information that may result to account takeover or loss to any person. Acknowledging the deleterious effect of these fraudulent activities on the economy, this bill declares the large-scale commission of punishable acts as a form of economic sabotage and heinous crime punishable to the maximum level allowed by law. Napapanahon ang probisyong ito ng panukalang batas upang matugunan ang mga puwang sa mga umiiral na batas kaugnay sa digital financial services. In addition to penalizing fraudulent acts involving financial accounts, this proposed measure also highlights the greater responsibilities of the responsible institutions, specifically the banks, non-banks, and other financial institutions and service providers in ensuring that their clients' financial accounts are protected through adequate risk management systems and controls. Dito ay klarong binibigyan diin ang kanilang pananagutan na maprotektahan ang mga account ng kanilang mga kliyente mula sa anumang uri ng panloloko. Before I end, allow me to express my gratitude to the sponsor of this bill, Senator Mark Villar, and to my fellow co-authors for their unyielding commitment to championing the cause behind this proposed measure. Ang pagpasa ng panukalang ito ay isang mahalagang hakbang sa pagpapanatili ng kaayusan ng ating ekonomiya at ng ating lipunan. Isa itong babala sa mga kriminal, isang babala na tuldukan na nila ang panluloko sa ating mga kababayan at sa ating bansa. Thank you very much, Mr. President, esteemed colleagues.
Thank you very much, Senator Gatchalian.
Mr. President, next to co-sponsor the measure is the distinguished gentleman from the great province of Cavite, no other than Senator Buong Revilla Jr. I move that he be recognized, Mr. President.
My distinguished colleague from the great province of Cavite, Senator Buong Revilla Jr. is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, I rise today to co-sponsor Senate Bill number 2560, which seeks to provide protection mechanisms from various cybercrime schemes perpetrated by online scammers through regulation of the use of bank accounts and e-wallets. I laud our sponsor, Senator Mark Villar, for shepherding this priority measure of the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, LEDAC, which ultimately aims to preserve public trust in digital finance. Masakit, masaklap, nakakapanlumo na maging biktima at maperwisyo ng mga online modus, lalo na sa panahon ng napakahirap na buhay, Mr. President. Hindi na po mabilang ang mga halos na simot ang mga digital wallets dahil sa mga financial scam. Yung mga isinusubi ng kakaunting kinikita para sana sa mga pangunahing mga bayarin, madalas naglalaho dahil sa mga manloloko na ito. Mismong Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas na rin ang nagdiin na malawak ang pinsalang dulot, dulot ng mga financial scam na ito. Parang ang apoy na tumutupok sa pera at kabuhayan ng mga walang muwang na Pilipino, Ginong Pangulo. Higit 1 bilyong piso ang posibleng na-scam na sa phishing o nakawan ng online identity. Napakaraming modus ang naglipa na at napakarami na rin mga kawawang na biktima na kadalasan ay walang laban sa talim ng panloloko. Kaya naman, ang mga kawawa nating kababayan ay naiiwang patuloy na umaasa na kahit paano ay maibalik ang nakulimbat mula sa kanilang mga walang pusong kawatan. Sometimes we tend to become so reliant on the convenience of technology and digitalization that we easily fall prey to scams. Ito ay pinapatunayan din ng ulat ng PNP na nakasaad na tumaas ng 68.98% ang naitalang cybercrime sa Pilipinas kumpara noong taong 2023. Sa kabila ng pagbaba ng bilang ng focus crimes, napakalaki naman ng itinaas ng cybercrimes. Ako po mismo, Ginoong Pangulo, nakakatanggap ng mga parehong sumbong. Noong nakaraang taon, marin kong pinaalalahanan ang NTC at GCash na mas maging maigting sa kanilang mga hakbang upang hindi na mabiktima ang ganitong uri ng scam ang ating mga kababayan. Patuloy po tayong magtulungan upang magsulong ng mga polisiya upang maprotektahan natin ang integridad ng ating financial system. I urge our colleagues to support the immediate passage of this measure. And with the permission of the sponsor, may I be made co-author of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Revilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to study further the measure, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2560 under Committee Report number 204. And before you act on the motion, Mr. President, may I also put on record that Senator Estrada would just like to insert into the records his co-sponsorship speech.
Thank you very much. So we take note of that. There be no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2492. This is the bill in the Philippine Maritime Zones Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of individual amendments, and with the consent of the body, I move that we resume the period of individual amendments using the clean copy of the bill as of February 20, 2024 as our working draft. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this juncture, I move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Francis Tol Tolentino, and to introduce his individual amendments, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. So move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, motion is approved. We'd like to recognize Senator Tolentino, the sponsor of the measure, and to interpolate, or rather propose amendments, is Senator Robin Hood Padilla.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo at sa ating pinunong mayorya. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Bismillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Isang magandang hapon po, lalong-lalo na po sa aking hinahangaan. At masasabi ko pong isa sa aking advisor, Senator Tol Tolentino. Isang magandang hapon po sa inyo.
Magandang hapon po, ginagalang na kapatid, Senator Robin Hood Padilla.
Ako po ay manggagaling doon po sa ating huling pag-uusap patungkol po sa aming hinihingi. Ito po ay napakahalaga sa mga matatawag po natin na tunay na kayamanan ng ating bansa sapagkat tayo po ay may kultura. At kapag pinag-usapan ang kultura, kasama po dyan ang teritoryo, pag-aari, at kasaysayan. Hindi po pwede na magkaroon ng isang kultura na walang kasaysayan at walang pag-aari. Ito pong usapin ng Sabah. Isang bagay po ito na humahamon sa gobyerno. Sapagkat sinasabi po ng kasaysayan na itong Sabah, atin po ito. Hindi po ito usapin ng kinuha lang natin sa isang lugar at sinabi ko dito. Hindi po, meron po itong historical background. At ito po ay may mga ebidensya galing pa sa kaharian ng Espanya at masasabing panahon ng Amerikano. At ito din po ay pinatunayan noong panahon na ang Pangulo ng Pilipinas ay si Diosdado Macapagal. Sapagkat nung nagkaroon po ng sinasabing Federation of Malaysia, nag-react ang Pilipinas sapagkat isinama ang Sabah, ang North Borneo. Kaya po nagkaroon tayo ng claim noong 1962. Ang hindi po natin maintindihan ay dumating ang 1968, panahon po ni Presidente Marcos Sr., tayo po ay gumawa ng batas. Ito po yung Republic Act 5446 na ang sinasabi sa Section 2 The definition of the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippine archipelago as provided in this act is without prejudice to the delineation of the baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah, situated in North Borneo, over which the Republic of the Philippines has acquired dominion and sovereignty. Napakaganda po nito, napakaliwanag po nito. Noong 1982, nagkaroon po ng UNCLOS. Mas maipapaliwanag po ng ating mahal na kasama at hinahanga ang teacher ko, si Senator Tolentino. Ano nga po pala yung ibig sabihin ng UNCLOS po? United Nations on Law of the Sea. Law of the Sea. Yan. Na-approve po yan noong 1982. Noong 1986, pagkatapos po ng revolution, nagkaroon po tayo ng 1987 Constitution. Doon po sa 1987 Constitution, hindi po natin maintindihan kung bakit yung historical nawala doon sa konstitusyon natin. Napalitan po yan, nanahimik yung patungkol po sa sinasabing historical rights. At hindi lang po yun, nagkaroon pa ng seksyon na nawala na ang mga royalties sa Pilipinas. Wala na ho tayong mga sultan. Nawala pa hong Pilipinas, wala pa hong mga Espanyol dito sa atin, meron na ho tayong mga sultan. Nawala po yan noong 1987 Constitution. Pati po yung historical rights sa pag-aari. Ngayon po, noong 2008, dumating po yung Republic Act 9522. Dito po sa Republic Act 9522, naging napakatahimik po nito sa usapin ng Sabah. Pero hindi po ibig sabihin na tinatalikuran po ito dahil sinabi mismo ng Supreme Court na naninindigan ang Supreme Court na mayroon tayong claim dyan sa Sabah. Ngayon, ang akin pong hinihingi, bakit po kaya ito po ay sa usapin po ito ng itong ginagawa natin na ito, itong baseline na ito, itong pag-aamenda natin, ito pong panukala po nyo na ito. Hinihingi po namin na huwag tumahimik itong panukala na ito patungkol po dito sa Sabah. Sapagkat mahirap pong tanggapin, Ako lang po, personal ko ito. At alam ko, yan din ang nararamdaman ng ating mga kapatid na tinatawag natin stateless. Stateless ngayon. Dahil sa dami ng mga refugee daw, hindi ko alam bakit tinawag na refugee, kababayan natin yun, na magmula dyan sa Sabah ay pwersahang inilikas at ibinalik sa sulok. Ang hindi po natin maintindihan ay bakit hindi natin makuha yung mismong suporta ng gobyerno kung paano ang binibigay na suporta ng gobyerno diyan sa West Philippine Sea, parehas lang tayong merong claim. At itong ang kaibahan, historical ito, meron itong mga patotoo, meron itong mga papeles, meron itong mga dokumento galing pa sa Espanyol, sa Amerikano, sabihin nyo na lahat kung anong gusto nyong ebidensya. 1982 lang yung UNCLOS. Hindi ko po sinasabi na wag natin kilalanin yung UNCLOS. Kilalanin po natin yan. Pero wag natin din kalimutan yung mga ibang treaty na nagpapalakas sa ating claim. Hindi po natin maintindihan. Hindi ko po sinasabi, sapagkat kung meron pong isang tao dito na naniniwala ako na nagmamalasakit sa claim ng mga Muslim dyan sa Sabah, ay si Senator Tolentino. Sa nga nagbigay sa akin ng lecture dyan. Ang dami niya dyan, ebidensya. Ang hinihingi lang po natin ay magkaroon tayo ng pantay na atensyon. Sapagkat sovereignty po ang Sabah, ang claim natin sa Sabah ay sovereignty. Hindi ko po sinasabi na awayin natin ang Malaysia. Wala po akong ganung intensyon. Wala po akong kahit na sinong kaibigan nating bansa ang awayin. Ang sinasabi ko lamang po, dapat sa ating local laws, sa ating mga pansariling batas, dapat ay matibay ang ating paninindigan nasa atin ang Sabah. Kung paano natin pinaglalaban na atin ang 200 nautical miles na sovereignty rights natin, ganun din natin ipaglaban ang sovereignty. Ang gobyerno natin sinabi, inclusive. Property ito, pag-aari ito ng mga Muslim na hindi nila inagaw, kanila to. Pag-aari nila to. Simple lamang po ang alam kong maiintindihan ng aking kaibigan itong aking amendment. Hindi po ito magiging kalabisan sapagkat tayo po reasonabling tao din, naiintindihan natin kung ano ang diplomacy. Naiintindihan po natin kung ano ang relasyon ng dalawang bansa at pwede silang mag-usap. Pero hindi po yan dapat maging hadlang para magkaroon tayo ng mga sarili nating batas dito sa ating bayan. Ito po sana, kung pwede po, kung nanaisin po ng ating mahal na kapatid, teacher, Senator Tolentino, maaari po ba akong magbigay ng aking amendment?
Mahal na Pangulo, tayo po ay pumapayag, sumasang-ayon sa pagbibigay ng amendments o pag-amyenda. Ito po ay karapatan ng ating ginagalang na kapatid. Subalit kung pagbibigyan po ninyo akong makatugon ng ilang kabanata, ay palagay ko po mas lalong liliwanag po ang ating usapin, lalong-lalo na sa mga nakikinig sa ngayon, kung pahintulutan.
Opo.
Ano po, mahal na Pangulo, wala po tayong dito sa batas natin ngayon, sa saligang batas, sa nabanggit na UNCLOS kanina, wala po tayong ibinigay na wala, hindi kinikilalang pag-aari, maging bahagi man ito ng makasaysayang pag-aari, maging bahagi man ito ng Tratado ng Paris o Tratado ng Washington noong mga nakaraang panahon. Ito po lahat ay naandyan, mahal na Pangulo. Dangan nga lamang na hindi ganon kabigkas ang mga katagang batas patungkol dito dahil nabanggit na rin ng ating mahal na kapatid buhat sa Nueva Ecija at sa Bicol na ang mundo ngayon ay kumikilala sa mga diplomatikong pag-uusap kung saan bilang kabahagi ng isang malaking rehiyon, halimbawa po ang ASEAN, ay tayo po ay may mga lingwaheng ginagamit na hindi nakakakuha ng masasakit, nagdudulot ng masasakit na damdamin o dili kaya ay magdudulot ng isang hindi kanais-nais na kabanatang diplomatiko, mahal na Pangulo. Gusto ko lamang pong banggitin na wala pong nabago sa ating pag-aari, sa ating kinikilalang sariling bahagi ng ating kapuluan, simula doon sa mga dating saligang batas hanggang sa ngayon, mahal na Pangulo. At gusto ko pong idagdag natin na tama, meron pong mga batas kung saan nakalagay yung nabanggit ng ating kapatid patungkol sa Sabah. Ito po yung Republic Act 5446 na binanggit niya kanina, Section 2. At bukod po doon, Mr. President, nakikita po natin nung tayo po ay nagkaroon ng interpellation at ito rin ating kapatid, ang ating nakapaliwanagan, ay atin pong pinaliwanag ng Marine yung katagang, and I quote, all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, unquote, would refer probably to that portion of North Borneo. So yung atin pong Article 1 ng ating saligang batas, kung idadagdag natin yung Section 2 ng Republic Act 5446 na hanggang sa ngayon po ay umiiral, ay magpapatunay na wala po tayong iniiwanan, tinataliktan at hindi na sinusulong na pag-aari patungkol po doon sa nabanggit ng ating mahal na kapatid. At magpapatunay po dito ang napakaraming kataga na nagbuhat sa kagalang-galang na kataas-taasang Korte Suprema kung saan doon po sa kaso ng Magallona versus Ermita ay sinabi, and I quote in English, yung ruling po ng Supreme Court, ang sinabi po nila ay the definition of the baselines, and I quote, the definition of the baselines of the territories of the Philippine archipelago as provided for in this act is without prejudice to the delineation, the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah, etc., etc. Ibig sabihin po, yung ruling ng Supreme Court is that it keeps open the door for drawing of the baseline. So wala po sa kasalukuyan, wala po tayong winawaglit, isinasa isang tabi, inalagay sa ilalim ng isang aparador, sa loob ng aparador. Buhay po lahat yan. Ang batas po natin ay buhay. At gusto ko pong kumuha sa isang talata, kasi po sa mahal na Pangulo, doon po sa UNCLOS, nung nilagdaan po ito. At ang isa po sa lumagda ay dating Secretary of Foreign Affairs, dating miyembro din po ng Senado, si Senator Arturo Tolentino. Sa UNCLOS po ay bawal po magkaroon ng isang reservation. Ang ginawa po ni Senator Tolentino ay gumawa po siya ng parang declaration or understanding. At ang nakalagay po doon sa declaration, pang-apat na talata in English, number 4, such signing, I'm now referring to the signing of the accession to the UNCLOS, such signing shall not in any manner impair or prejudice the sovereignty of the Republic of the Philippines over any territory over which it exercises sovereign authority, such as, binanggit po dito, yung Kalayaan Islands and the waters pertinent thereto. Meaning to say that even when we signed UNCLOS, we never gave up, we never abandoned our claims, Mr. President. So, tama po ang ating kinagalang na kapatid na sa ginagawa niyang pagbibigkas ng kanyang salubin. Subalit gusto ko pong idagdag at bigyan ng diin na wala pong pagbabago. It has been there. It will remain there. It is part of our history. It is part of our culture. It is part of our legal regime. It is part of the international agreement we entered into called UNCLOS, and it has been recognized. UNCLOS, our membership in UNCLOS has been recognized by the entire diplomatic community. So it's there, Mr. President. Wala po tayo, maging sa batas na ating binabalangkas ngayon, ay wala po tayong inaabandona. Subalit, meron lamang mga kataga na hindi natin na ilalagay, sang-ayon na rin sa mga kasunduang ating pinasukan na lalong-lalo na yung United Nations Charter kung saan lahat po ng resolutions ng conflict should be settled under the provisions provided for by the United Nations Charter, which would refer to peaceful settlement and negotiations without derogating Philippine sovereignty. Yun lamang po ang may dadagdag ko sa bilang tugon sa pananaw na ginagalang natin ng ating kapatid na buhat sa Nueva Ecija at sa rehiyon ng Bicol, Mr. President. Salamat po, mahal na kapatid, Senator Padilla.
Maraming salamat po.
Mahaba yung explanation ng ating professor.
Opo, napakaganda po ng kanyang masasabi ko pong another lecture from the teacher, Senator Tolentino. Napakaganda po. Alam niyo po, ito po ay tatanawin na utang na loob sa inyo ng marami nating mga kapatid sapagkat matagal na po namin inaantay na magkaroon uli ng batas na magbibigay ng lakas ng loob sa ating mga kapatid na nandyan pa rin ang gobyerno ng Pilipinas at kakampi nila. Ito po yung aking amendment. Handa na po bang pakinggan ng ating teacher?
Buong pagbubukas po ng kaisipan, damdamin at puso ang aking magiging paghahanda.
Isang Babaysiano at isang Batanggenyo ang natatagalugan dito, mahal na Pangulo. Ito na po. On page 6, dito po sa inyo pong panukala, page 6.
And I think, Mr. President, we have the same clean copy dated February 20, 2024,
Yes.
coming from the Secretariat. Page 6.
Opo.
Yes, Your Honor.
Lines 23 to 25, section 19,
Section 19.
amend the last paragraph to read as follows. All other laws, presidential decrees, comma, executive orders, comma, rules and regulations, comma, proclamations, comma, and other issuances, comma, inconsistent with or contrary to the provisions of this act are deemed amended or repealed accordingly, colon, provided that nothing in this act shall be construed as repealing Section 2 of Republic Act Number 5446 as amended by Republic Act Number 9522 or an act to define the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippines.
Can we, Mr. President, can we hear again the last line? The title of Republic Act 9522 was mentioned. What about Republic Act 5446?
Basahin ko po ulit.
Opo.
Apo. Ito po yung idilagdag namin, mahal na Senator Tolentino. Pagkatapos po ng colon, provided that nothing in this act shall be construed as repealing Section 2 of Republic Act Number 5446, comma, as amended by Republic Act Number 9522 or an act to define the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippines.
Period.
Period.
Mr. President, can I ask for a minute for our historical legislative records, Mr. President, the exact wording of Section 2 of Republic Act 5446, Mr. President? Pakibasa po siguro yung
Apo.
kung ano po yung Section 2 ng Republic Act 5446 na gusto nyong kahit hindi po ilagay yung buong section, yung pangalan, yung nilalaman po ng Section 2 5446.
Opo, mahal na Pangulo. Ang sabi po dito sa Republic Act Number 5446, Section 2, the definition of the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippine Archipelago as provided in this act is without prejudice to the delineation of baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah, situated in North Borneo, over which the Republic of the Philippines has acquired dominion and sovereignty. Yun po yung nasa RA 5446. Sa Tagalog po, ang kahulugan ng mga baseline ng territorial sea ng Philippine Archipelago, gaya ng sinasaad sa batas na ito, ay hindi makahadlang sa delineasyon ng mga baseline ng territorial sea sa paligid ng teritoryo ng Sabah na matatagpuan sa North Borneo kung saan ang Republika ng Pilipinas ay nakakuha ng kapangyarihan at soberenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, since mention was made by the good gentleman from Nueva Ecija and the Bicol region of Republic Act 9522, this representation, Mr. President, would probably be amenable to a modified version of his proposed amendment. I am particularly highlighting Section 2 of Republic Act 9522. And if I will may be allowed to read now, Section 2 of Republic Act 9522, which is the act that amended the law previously cited by the good gentleman from Nueva Ecija, refers to, and I quote Section 2, the baselines in the following areas over which the Philippines likewise exercises sovereignty and jurisdiction shall be determined as regime of islands, quote unquote, and under the Republic of the Philippines, consistent with Article 121 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, colon, letter A, the Kalayaan Island Group as constituted under Presidential Decree 1596 and Bajo de Masinloc, also known as the Scarborough Shoal, Mr. President. Ang counter-proposal ko po rito, Mr. President, kung atin pong ilalagay ang Republic Act 5, Section 2, 5446, ay ilagay na rin natin po ang Kalayaan Island Group at ang Baho de Masinloc o Scarborough Shoal na nakasaad po sa Section 2 na Republic Act 9552. Para na sa ganun po ay mas maliwanag, Mr. President, dito sa repealing clause. Mr. President, can I ask for a minute? Revilla and the Bicol region, Mr. President, this representation is amenable to the amendment, subject to a modification, which should now read as follows. Instead of a colon, instead of a colon from the repealing clause, add a semicolon and then the following phrase: provided that nothing in this act shall be construed as repealing Section 2 of Republic Act 5446 and Section 2 of Republic Act 9522, subject to style, Mr. President. If the proponent would be amenable to that, that would be acceptable to this representation, because it will be more expansive and broad to include our interests as contained in the arbitral ruling, Mr. President.